Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute biggest game changers in human history, the Industrial Revolution. And I want you to think about it like this. This wasn't just a few new gadgets. No, this was a complete server update for humanity, totally rewriting the code for how we live, work, and even think.
Right. So for thousands of years, humanity's operating system was kind of laggy. Progress was slow. The Industrial Revolution, kicking off in Great Britain around 1760, was that massive patch we needed. It was a whole wave of tech innovations that just exploded our ability to produce things. Suddenly, thanks to machines and new power sources, a single worker could do the work of hundreds.
And this lays out the shift so perfectly. You go from a skilled craftsman in a little workshop making things by hand to a massive factory floor humming with machines. It really is the same kind of jump as going from your local corner shop to a behemoth like Amazon. The scale, the speed, the efficiency, it was a whole new world, and the old way just couldn't keep up.
So that brings up the big question, right? Why Britain? And why then, in the middle of the 1700s? Well, it wasn't a fluke. It was more like a perfect recipe coming together, a unique mix of people, land, and money that created the ideal conditions for this explosion to happen.
When you really boil it down, it comes down to these three key ingredients. First, you had a huge boom in population. Second, you had an agricultural revolution that could actually feed all those new mouths. And third, you had a rock-solid trade network to move everything around. Let's dig into each one.
So, first up, more people. A lot more people. Thanks to things like better food and basic hygiene, people just started living longer. Fewer people were dying, and the population just surged. Now, this was huge because it created two things every new industry craves: a giant pool of workers and an even bigger market of customers who need to buy stuff.
Okay, but if you've got all these new people, how do you feed them? Well, at the same time, farming got its own major update. You can think of it like a new DLC, a downloadable content pack for agriculture that totally leveled up food production with all these new, clever techniques.
And this was one of the greatest hacks in that whole DLC, the four-field crop rotation. See, before this, farmers had to leave fields empty or fallow to let the soil recover. But with this system, no wasted space. You'd plant wheat for bread, then turnips and clover to feed your cattle, and barley for, well, beer. The animals then fertilized the soil, making it rich for the next crop of wheat. It was a perfect, self-sustaining loop of productivity.
And here's the crucial consequence of all that farming efficiency. You just didn't need as many people working on farms anymore. So where did this massive new generation of people go? They flocked to the cities, looking for jobs. They became the workforce that would power the brand new factories.
And the final ingredient, trade. Britain was crisscrossed with new roads and canals, making it easy to move goods around the country. But its global empire was the real engine. It could import massive amounts of cheap raw materials, like cotton from India and America, turn it into textiles in its factories, and then sell the finished goods all over the world. And, this is key, all that profit got plowed right back into building more and bigger factories. It was a massive feedback loop of money and production.
Okay, so you've got the people, you've got the food, and you've got the trade networks. All the ingredients are there. So what did this first wave of the revolution actually look like? Well, it was all about two things: the raw, brute force of steam and the hard industrial muscle of iron. Textiles are the perfect example of how this worked. It was like this frantic tech race. First, weavers could work faster than spinners could make yarn. That's a bottleneck. So inventors create new spinning machines. Suddenly, the spinners are making way too much yarn for the weavers. So then, you get the invention of power looms to speed up the weaving. This constant back-and-forth pressure led to unbelievable innovation. The result? In just 70 years, textile production increased by 100 times. Just staggering.
Now, you can't run all these new machines with muscle power. You need something bigger. And that something was the steam engine. The fuel? Coal, which Britain just happened to have tons of, right under its feet. The steam engine was an absolute game changer, powering not just the textile mills, but pretty much everything, from making iron to the new railways.
And speaking of railways, just look at that number. After the first successful line opened in 1830, Britain went into what you could only call a railway mania. In just 2 decades, they laid over 10,000 kilometers of track. Imagine the demand this created. All those rails, locomotives, and bridges needed iron, tons and tons of it, which totally supercharged the iron industry.
Of course, none of this was cheap.
Building factories, inventing machines, laying thousands of kilometers of railway track, this stuff costs a fortune. So this revolution in technology had to be matched by a revolution in finance. You needed a whole new rule book for how money worked.
Which gets us to the million-dollar question, or I guess the million-pound question. Where did the money for all this actually come from? Who was fronting the cash for a giant factory or an entire railway line?
Well, in the early days, it was often just family savings. An entrepreneur might risk their own money to start a small workshop. But as the projects got bigger and way more expensive, that just wasn't enough. So banks started stepping in with big loans, and for the really massive projects, you saw the rise of joint stock companies. They would sell off little pieces of the company, shares, to the public, raising huge amounts of money from thousands of small investors.
And the philosophy, the ideology underpinning this whole system was economic liberalism. You can think of it as the official operating system for this new capitalist world, an idea pushed by thinkers like the famous Adam Smith. It set out a very specific set of rules for how the economy should run, and frankly, we're still debating those rules today.
At its core, the idea was pretty simple. Owners should be totally free to run their businesses and hire workers however they want. Trade between countries should be totally free, with no taxes. And, this was the big one, the government should just stay out of it. Let the market do its thing. Now, this hands-off approach fueled incredible growth, for sure, but it came with a huge dark side effect. With no one checking their power, it led to the brutal, unchecked exploitation of workers, which eventually sparked a rise of unions in the labor movement.
All right, so just as everyone was getting used to a world of steam and iron, the game changed again. Starting around 1870, the revolution entered its second wave. This was like a major expansion pack, with new sources of power, new industries, and some powerful new players entering the arena.
So what did this new DLC include? Well, the energy sources leveled up from coal and steam to electricity and oil, which were way more flexible. This didn't just improve old industries, it created brand new ones like chemicals and mass-produced steel, which let us build skyscrapers. Businesses got so enormous, they started forming new structures, like cartels and trusts, to basically control entire markets. And suddenly, it wasn't just Britain leading the charge.
And this chart just says it all. Look at this. By 1900, Britain is still a giant. Yeah, but look at Germany. It hit the ground running and was right on Britain's tail. And over in America, another industrial giant was waking up. The game had gone multiplayer. It was now an all-out race for industrial dominance, a competition that would define the coming century.
And that really brings us to the final crucial question. This whole revolution completely reshaped our planet. It created wealth on a scale never seen before and gave us technology that would have seemed like magic. But it also created crushing poverty, horrific working conditions, and intense global rivalries. So you have to ask, was all this progress actually making life better for everyone? It's a question that would echo through the massive conflicts and social changes of the 20th century. Thanks for joining